welcome. You're joining us at Hyde Park on AdaDerana 24. As we speak today, Sri Lanka is in the crosshairs of a diplomatic row, a possible controversy between India and China as Sri Lanka approves the entry to a Chinese vessel, Yuan Wang 5, to dock at the Hambantota port, the southern port of Sri Lanka, while India has directly raised concerns and opposition to the vessel. Again, China says this is on a research and satellite navigation purpose, but yet to find out what this controversy is all about, whether Sri Lanka should consider Indian concerns or disregard India totally, and where Sri Lanka should stand in terms of managing a foreign policy given the current political and economic crisis that Sri Lanka is faced, and how this island nation should balance our superpowers and regional powers. I've invited to our studios an expert on the subject, a former foreign minister of Sri Lanka. A very warm welcome to you, Mr. Rohitha Bogollagama.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Dr. Bogollagama, we've been talking about the Chinese vessel for about a week now. It was unclear whether Sri Lanka was actually welcoming this ship, whether Sri Lanka had any knowledge or information about a Chinese vessel that was bound to Sri Lanka until Reuters news agency took to report on the news itself. And they had quoted Defense Ministry officials who had initially declined that they had any information of such a vessel. What is your view on on this current controversy and the surrounding information that we are privy to?
In fact, what we have to address here, basically these things cannot be taken by surprise. These are long drawn plans that are put into execution on bilateral understandings and, I would say, scheduling. But these vessels sailing already started sailing from their ports in China, arriving in Hambantota on the 11th of this month, staying there till the 17th of the month. And first in this series shall we look at what are we talking about in terms of vessel, whether it's a warship or a satellite transmission ship or a scanning ship, etc. Now, if it falls into a category of war supporting vessels, then belonging to navies rather than merchant navy of a country, like commercial vessels, then of course special permission has to be obtained. If you are flying under another flag for merchandise purposes and commercial transactions, of course, ports of call are there. And in terms of the international navigation laws, one can always sail into a port in terms of the customary procedures associated. Here is a vessel, if you take a picture of Yuan 5, is one of the latest, I would say, satellite transmitting plus surveying vessels, where they have very high powered, what is something similar to the X-ray equipment, which are of high resolutions, that can stretch to a distance of about 1,000 kilometers or beyond, and make proper ground service, or including the area service. So I think the concerns of India is, here is a Chinese vessel with whom they have certain amount of tension, obviously because they are big neighbors. Chinese border on India, on top of the northern part of India, is huge, and they have concerns. That's a bilateral concerns are there for large countries. Here too, they may have those things. Having said that, when a vessel of this nature comes, then of course India reacts in this manner. For that, only diplomacy can play a role. How do we manage these affairs? First, when we had notice of this, we should share this information, because it's a matter of concern, obviously we have to understand. And also we have to manage with our friends like China. And these are not the first time such vessels are coming to Sri Lanka from other neighboring countries as well. But the sensitivity is purely because this has the type of equipment that can penetrate the Indian soil and beyond that, the Indian territory, in terms of both air and sea and land, surveys and x-rays to be taken. So they have a genuine concern that they have expressed themselves.
Dr. Bogollagama, we've been talking about the sensitivity of this of the ship's arrival in Sri Lanka. But in your expertise, what kind of an analysis do you have of the impact on the regional security when a vessel as this arrives in one of the most geopolitically sensitive areas of the region?
Of course, geopolitical concerns are of great importance for a country's planning processes for management of diplomacy. But having said that, I don't think we have to get too excited in the manner in which this vessel has sailed into the country, because we would have had previous notice and we have permitted it. Now it's a matter of mitigating the type of misgivings associated with Indian concerns. So India also has a legitimate concern that they have expressed. Having said that, I take it, this may not lead, because Sri Lanka being a very innocent party, between two major players in the world, India on one side and equally China on the other hand. So that this may be a starting point for similar exercises to take place in the future too. Therefore, that is what we have to avoid. In the event this type of nature of this type of visits are going to be frequent and it's going to irritate our neighbors, then it's a matter of great concern for us to see how best we could mitigate these developments.
Should we in the first place have allowed such a vessel to enter Sri Lankan waters?
We should have looked at in terms of what this vessel is all about. And in the event it is becoming too sensitive to the Indian interest and they have concerns of it, then obviously we should have talked with the Chinese, explained to them, particularly because we have to play a game of good management of our foreign relations. What I would say, today we need the best management techniques to be employed in getting what is right for Sri Lanka first. And having said that, India has been coming to our assistance, as recalled by the President yesterday in his own statement to Parliament, and he has acknowledged the role of India in big time, and equally the other neighboring countries are important for us, and also our traditional friends like China, who have been standing by us throughout at the most worst periods of our Sri Lanka's recent history. China has been assisting us in no small measure. So therefore, these are matters we have to take into account. At the same time, being friends, we could always share certain concerns we may have with the arrival of this type of vessels to Sri Lanka.
According to the information I've received, we've allowed Indian vessels, the most number of Indian defense and war-related vessels to visit Sri Lanka in the past, and Japan follows with the US coming third. So the number of Chinese vessels are limited to a handful of those that have visited Sri Lanka. But in this given context, when we talk about Indian concern and a Chinese vessel coming into Sri Lanka, can Sri Lanka really avoid a Chinese vessel visiting our port when we've allowed so many Indian vessels, followed by Japanese and US defense-related vessels as well?
China is not our immediate neighbor. India is our neighbor, whether their vessels come to Sri Lanka or not. We are only about 20 to 30 kilometers away from the Indian shores as a country, as an island. So the presence of Indian vessels, whether they are within our territorial waters or inside our harbors or ports, is of not very significant. Here is vessels coming from beyond our hemisphere in terms of the territorial waters of Sri Lanka and the Indian Ocean by itself. We have already considered the Indian hegemony over the Indian Ocean, where the South India is concerned, not South India real, our South Asia is concerned. And with that, the Indian vessels coming even on a regular basis is a part and parcel of their waters in terms of beyond our territorial waters is the Indian waters that come into play. So that their vessels are sailing, they may have their submarines going around. So these are little impact in terms of our interest, because we have to be part and parcel of our traditional and also the relationships we have been maintaining. But China is a country that is coming into the Indian Ocean, and also come in and park in their vessels, military assets in Sri Lanka in our ports with close proximity to Indian boundaries. That's a matter of serious concern. It's like our going into American vessels coming into maybe South Korea or going across to across the South China Sea to Japan. Likewise, they are matters of concern to the Chinese at that point. So that is why there is always tension. In South Korea, then comes over to Japan, and amongst the three of them. So these are concerns very valid at times, and sensitivities of nations and countries must be always taken, should be factored in to our foreign policy management. So that's the exercise that is the responsible rise with the foreign ministry.
I'd like to talk about foreign policy as well, but going back to your time as foreign minister, you were foreign minister of Sri Lanka during a most crucial time of our history, and that required the management of these superpowers and the sensitivity in balancing these superpowers when Sri Lanka had to make certain decisions on the country's favor. So how did you, I'd like to talk about your experience also, working with the administration, working with diplomats and other regional superpowers in managing Sri Lanka's viewpoint and standing by it.
Yeah, the time I became foreign minister, I think at that time it was, we were going out of one phase of what we termed as a peaceful period of since 2002 to 2006, because of the peace accord that was signed by Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe at that time, the current president. And when I took over the foreign ministry responsibilities as minister, we had, I myself had participated as peace talks with the LTT in Geneva on 2 occasions. Except for Prabhakaran, Velipulle Prabhakaran, the entire hierarchy of the LTT I had met in Geneva on 2 occasions. That means 2 sessions. That is, once it was in June, followed up by somewhere in September in the year 2006, spending about 3 days at each session, then going out for a break, about 3 months, 4 months, coming back, starting again. So I interacted closely with the LTT key players, Balasingham downwards to Pulidevan, then we had Tamil Chelvam, the whole gamut of the hierarchy of the LTT. Having talked in Geneva, that also exposed me to the strategies we should adopt in terms of how we should navigate this process. Because I noticed at that time they commanded overall acceptance as a movement world across, because they had the type of support as a liberation movement. Not as a terrorist movement. A lot of countries condemn them for terrorism, but recognize the cause. So that from the Western powers to the Eastern presence, they were fairly recognized as what we call, not as a state party, as another party associated in negotiations. So with this, we had a fairly tough stance to take, how we are going to label them once again as terrorists. That is the conversion that I had to adopt as a matter of strategy, to call them terrorists. And for that purpose, when I went to Washington, I had to explain, in fact, I had the privilege of meeting with the hierarchy of the defense establishment, from Dr. Gates, who was the defense secretary, then coming to Condoleezza Rice, and the president was George W. Bush, then coming to his national security advisor, then going across to the Justice Department, meeting with the Attorney General Gonzalez, likewise, and also put the entire apparatus in place. Not only the blockade of arms supplies to Sri Lanka, in various other LTT assets being brought across the Indian Ocean, but also to impose restrictive measures to prevent the money supply from Europe to their destinations in Asia, where the monies were coming, the collections were coming, and thereby they were procuring arms, and they were indulging in other illicit trades in the world, from human smuggling, you name it, to narcotics. You had what you call money laundering, all the offences, and also they were having assets in the form of vessels. They had about 11 to 13 vessels going across this part of the world in the oceans. So we had to have international backing. So US came on top because they had the satellite strength of satellite information, and also India was a major party to satisfy politically. So that's why I was able to make about 27 times meeting with the Indian Prime Minister, at that time Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, then Foreign Minister Pranab Mukherjee, likewise engaged fully in terms of explaining the issues. India was looking at a political solution to the matter. They were not encouraging terrorism, but they were concerned of the people of Sri Lanka, both in the north and the rest of the country. They never wanted our shores to be used as a ground field for terrorism. Now you see the recent attacks coming in Kabul by the US, destroying the Al-Qaeda current leader, al-Samani, being destroyed on Sunday. Why? The agreement between Afghanistan and the US at the time of US virtually giving up Afghanistan was that they will not make a terror base. But they found this Al-Qaeda leader still remaining in Kabul under their coverage, so that they had to take him out. So those are justifications they found in a country which we believe in civilized developments, and for that path is to be avoiding terrorism. So we had to employ the strategies even in the UK. Then came the EU. By that time there were co-chairs that came into being because of the peace accord that was signed, what we call the peace treaty that was signed between the LTT and the government of Sri Lanka, supervised by Norway. And we had co-chairs including the US, Norway coming in, then you had Japan. Then we also had the EU presence. With that, we had every month I used to meet up with the co-chairs, discuss whilst they were advocating a peaceful transition in terms of LTT to come into the negotiating table. We also had to have our military presence in the north to protect our people. So the message that I took out to the world was, we are fighting terrorists in the country. And Minister Kadirgama's I would say assassination, it was a matter in point to show that they are not allowing even the innocent, they are targeting even the politicians irrespective of who they are, even from their own community race. The people have been felled and they are repeating their history and they shouldn't be believed. And we, a legitimate government of Sri Lanka that we represent, we are fighting to protect our territorial integrity and sovereignty of our nation, along with the freedom of our people, irrespective of who we are, whether it's the Tamils or the Sinhalese. And if you take the list of our people, the victims, from the Muslims to the Burghers to the Sinhalese, all have fell to the LTT bullet. And that is the sacrifice including the Tamil community has made in order to see there's no terrorism in this country. So we had to do this intensively, and for that matter we had to have platforms to talk these things. And for that I was getting onto every possible international forum, like the ARF, that is the ASEAN Regional Forum, where 27 countries were there, ACD, 31 countries were associated. Then we had the Shanghai Cooperation Dialogue, where China and India too comes into play there. Then we had the US come in to assist us in terms of bilateral relationships, and they were concerned certain aspects. But in the meantime, they were also not tolerating terrorism. They were very frank about that. So we had to manage it with the US ambassadors here at that time. Bob Blake was here, Robert Blake. He was concerned about in the event there are civilian casualties, yes. But in the event terrorists get killed in the battle, then of course it's a matter of explaining how it is. So we had to have a continuous engagement with the world at large.
You did mention it's a matter of explaining our side of the story, but do you think our administrations, you've worked under former President Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga and when our now President, then Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe was the Premier of the country, and you've also worked under the Mahinda Rajapaksa administration when he was President. But in terms of our foreign policy and managing these concerns by the international community, where did we fail? Because it seems that even at the UNHRC, Sri Lanka's matter continues to be taken up negatively. And currently, our former Foreign Minister G.L. Pires has been raising concern that this matter will be taken up seriously, given Sri Lanka's economic crisis and the political instability and the manipulation of Parliament, as he termed it.
It's like this. Basically, how I look at it, we fought it, we won the battle against terrorism. But still, we had to attend to certain reconciliation process which were part of the declaration we entered into with the United Nations, with the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and that of the government of Sri Lanka, where I officially submitted it across. And that's how we had a joint press conference. We announced it, and I spoke for the government of Sri Lanka, and Secretary General Ban Ki-moon represented the United Nations. And this was done in Kandy on the 23rd of May. We just finished with the LTT on the 18th of May, and within 5 days the top delegation of the UN arrived, and we visited along with the Secretary General and myself. We both went to the north, and we went to Kilinochchi, we went to Mullaitivu, we went to Vavuniya camps. We saw to ourselves how the government of Sri Lanka has helped out in the rescue operation. Over 300,000 Tamil civilians been rescued, including Prabhakaran's own parents were rescued by the military. So we showed what has been done, the transparency, and these evolved because there were satellites all the time. Take cover in Sri Lanka. At the same time, they had all the images. And most mornings I had the American ambassador calling on me and showing me the previous night, they call it our bomb in the north in terms of those terrorist locations, and whatever the collateral damage. And these things we had to explain to them, how these things came about, why we call them terrorist bombing. And terrorist bombing against civilian casualties is different. That's how the explanations are needed. And they came to accept it. But there was a period they wanted us to account for certain things. And on the 26th of May itself, in 2009, they moved for the first resolution in Geneva, the entire EU. But we were able to balance it off. We didn't lose it there. Then came subsequently the resolutions started coming, seeking accountability on the casualties and also the human rights violations, atrocities, they named it like that. But then subsequent to me, there were so many foreign ministers in office since I ceased to be in office. Then we should have, my line of argument is, we should have spoken with the world. We should have been fairly truthfully communicating to the world, and also engaging with the world in terms of reconciliation process. And for that, we need several avenues to be tapped. It has many facets in reconciliation. Not only the humanitarian work that we must carry out, we also have to be explaining to them of the concerns like missing persons, etc., the war victims, the compensation, all these things come as a matter of integrated to one another, and we have to see these links are being well explained. So that's how we should have done. I think there was a gap in that. That is one burden may come on the current president, once again President Ranil Wickremesinghe, in terms of the accountability and both in terms of reconciliation.
Was this a failure in our foreign policy over the years, or is it the foreign ministers who were appointed to the position?
How can I answer this? You are too blunt. Ask if the failures of individuals. I will avoid that being said. But overall, I would say it's not the foreign policy issue. It is, our foreign policy is very neutral. We have no enemies to speak of. We are friends with everybody. In generally speaking, we are a good non-aligned country, but we are align ourselves in terms of our economic relationships. These are obvious and part and parcel of world politics. Having said that, engagement, in the event we breach our engagement, and we lower our so-called focus in the important segments in terms of our relationships. That is a very fatal mistake that one is making for a nation and for a country. Foreign policy must be kept alive all the time. Foreign relations must be kept alive all the time. We work on a broad framework. And for that, two things we need. In order to take our message across, we need engagement. In order to develop engagement, we need mutual respect from one another with whom we are dealing. Unless they recognize us as a serious country that is keeping our word, our integrity must be put on top, then only the relationships get built up, and then we start communicating. How best can we communicate is another area to concentrate on. The tools that we have to use in communication is relationship built up. And once you have a relationship, we should not go and say things for the sake of saying. We must be saying things in terms of what comes first for Sri Lanka's interest, and equally respect the views of our partners in the world across, our friends across, to understand the gravity in which we are maintaining our situation back at home, equally respecting their concerns if they express them to our face. So like how we build it up. That's why it is very vital. We must be part and parcel of the machinery that is deployed by the major countries in the world, like the US bloc. You have the Indian interest, you have the Chinese interest, you have the Asian interest. That's why you find everyone is part of a club now. And there is not only single club, these are not exclusivities, but several of these forums. Then you have more people coming around you, more countries supporting you, more countries willing to listen to you, and more countries will respect our strengths as a nation.
We'll take a short break here at Hyde Park on Ada Derana 24 before we return to speak of Sri Lanka's foreign policy and the key challenges the current administration under President Ranil Wickremesinghe may have to face when managing our regional superpowers and friendly nations going forward. We're in conversation with Mr. Rohitha Bogollagama, former Foreign Minister of Sri Lanka. You are an attorney since 1976, from that time until about 1990, the early 1990s. Before you entered Parliament from the United National Party in year 2000.
That's right.
And you've, as I said before, worked with the former President Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga and former President Mahinda Rajapaksa as well. And during that time, now President Ranil Wickremesinghe managed to be Prime Minister a couple of times. You've worked with him as well.
Of course.
Going forward for the new President, Ranil Wickremesinghe, who became President, I think this is historic as we speak of it, who only secured a national list seat in Parliament, is now the President, while the President who won a majority, overwhelming majority, is no longer there. But what are the key challenges for presidency of this nature going forward, especially not from a domestic point of view, but from managing external affairs of the island?
In fact, because you recall my period in the UNPA with the current President, it is he who appointed me as the organizer for Nikawati electorate. In 2000, I contested and won the Kudnaikal district, and then became Minister of Industries under him when he became Prime Minister in 2001. So that the time he signed into the LTT agreement, ceasefire agreement, I was Minister of Industries, and he was the Prime Minister.
Right.
Then I joined the Chandrika Bandaranaike government, followed up with Mahinda Rajapaksa succession. With that, now he's back as the President of Sri Lanka. The question of whether it's one seat in Parliament, presidency, it doesn't work like that. It's a matter of parliamentary franchise. People's franchise being exercised by majority parliamentary members decides on the succession of a president. And president who got elected with a huge majority and equal number of votes, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, he has resigned office, That is also part of the constitution of this country. A president can resign from office. So then it comes within the parliamentary, the constitutional process. And then the parliament has the right to elect the next successor for the balance period of the first president. So the current president, Ranil Wickremesinghe, has got elected with a overwhelming majority in parliament, over about 51 members voting as a majority, 134 seats members voted in favor. His closest opponent came Dala Salah Peruma, member of parliament. He got 82 seats, so there's a very clear majority of 51 seats over the closest rival. Having said that, now he is declared the president, and he has already announced his policy paper yesterday in parliament, address in the house, and he has stretched from the economic priorities to the political priorities for the country as a nation. What I like most in his statement, he went on to say that I am not a short-term planner. My plans are meant in terms of long-term. That's what I did throughout his political career, he said. And sometimes people found fault for doing such long-term planning. But he cited 3 good examples where Sri Lanka missed out without having long-term plans. And one was the oil tank farm development in Trincomalee, where up to now it has not got into its full optimum use. And that was a major mistake because we never planned it properly, and the resistance came on tribal issues, to whom it is being given, etc. But today people are in the queues asking for a gallon of petrol or 2 liters of petrol, stay in queues for 5-6 days sometimes in order to get these things. Why? We lost out the true potential we had built into Sri Lanka without using it. So now he has put a plan for the country on a long-term basis. He said by the year 2048, we should be a developed nation. That's another 20-25 years. Yes, why not? In the event we plan our education, plan our agriculture, plan our exports, and if our economy gets catered to be an export-oriented economy, then of course the dollar issues will not arise for the country. If we had done that, all major plans of any country for that matter takes time to realize. But once it gets realized, the stability is there, the continuity is there, sustainability is there, people benefit out of it. So this is the planning that Ranil Wickremesinghe presidency is going to introduce to Sri Lanka. And that planning is what he needs, the consolidation of the political strengths, and to show the world here is a government with strength. And that is one other aspect of his political trajectory. That is to bring a unity government for the first time in Sri Lanka to cater to these dire needs of the people. Today people are virtually, it's on record, a lot of people suffer without having adequate food, adequate income, support in terms of transport, fertilizer for their paddy fields, for plantations. So we need the entire overall of our system. For that we need stability. In order to cater to stability, for another 30 months before whatever the period there, the people will exercise their franchise once again. We need to stabilize and get the economic agenda going. For that, the unity government being sought. That is why I think he is laboring heavily now to bring the collectiveness of a nation. Even yesterday he emphasized another key point which impressed me, that in the event we remain divided, as Sinhalese, as communities, as various community blocks, in terms of religion, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of language, it only retards our strengths and development for the future. So let us call ourselves Sri Lankans and go forward on a strong agenda that can impress the world at large, that here is a nation rising to meet all the challenges and accomplishing their goals as set out in a very transparent manner, in a manner the world can come to respect us. That is what we have to strive. So I think he has come out with the leadership that the country was lacking for some time, without a proper solid communication both to the country and to the world at large.
Yesterday's policy statement, the maiden policy statement by the President, gave the international community as well as Sri Lanka signs of stable policies for the country, consistent policy, although Sri Lanka for a long time has been talking about becoming Asia's miracle or the hub of South Asia and becoming developed in the 2020 period, although now Sri Lanka is faced with grave, dire economic circumstances. But going forward, in managing these foreign policy concerns that we have already, we are in a kind of turmoil where India and China have concerns about the vessel that we spoke of. How do you think a Ranil Wickremesinghe government could manage these going forward, Mr. Bogollagama? Especially, there have been times when Sri Lanka managed to easily anger India and irritate India and sideline India from Sri Lankan matters. And we got closer to China. We managed to anger Japan as well, although Japan has been Sri Lanka's friend since the J.R. Jayawardena presidency. So how do you think a Ranil Wickremesinghe era could avoid all these challenges?
I'm sure he has the experience as a leader and the world recognition as an individual. Because he has been in the scene for a long time and he has been always carrying the democratic flag high and above. So that's a major strength of a leader in today's context. The world respects leaders who are committed to democratic principles. So that is why I think he has brought in the two factors here, law and order and democracy for the nation. So even for the protesters, he has said innocent protest is allowed and is encouraged. It is something, a way of voicing one's concerns. That's important for a democracy. And it's important to get the certain parts into the correct line. And for that matter, he is encouraging them. At the same time, violence, if you are misusing your liberties to bring about destruction to the national interest, then of course law and order has to prevail. So I think it's a very good way to look at the governing pattern for the future. From a government of nothing, he has created a government where hope is there for people now. Once again, that's one mistake the previous government made, including the president. Because the type of lethargy that set in the government due to lack of action created all this confusion both to the policymakers, to the civil service, to the armed forces, to the law and order situation of the country, and no direction properly. So that means a country can't function. And that's the result was people were on the streets seeking a direction to the country to get it up, because people wanted their succor, sustenance, then medicine. All these things are basic requirements. We were lacking all that. Still, we have to cure all these deficits. So I think President Wickremesinghe has a major challenge in his hands to cater to the people's needs and to bring up the economy, which he has said. No short-term measures, but long-term. But short-term, we have to have certain assistance coming from the world, multilateral institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, Asian Development Bank. The bilateral strengths, we must use it to the optimum level, and that is what you need, good foreign relations development and management. That's what I am emphasizing on this foreign relations aspect. That's what we did in the past. All our development programs were assisted from the time of President J.R. Jayawardena, even prior to that, during our the post-independence era. Development came with foreign engagement and assistance from abroad to Sri Lanka, foreign investments, because President Jayawardena took a very liberal market-oriented economic policy. The US was supporting us. That's how Martin Trust and them came and started our apparel industry. Apparel industry didn't fall from the sky. It had to be created. Then the infrastructure had to be created in the free trade zones. When I myself was chairman of the BOI, large investors were coming from the West, and equally from the East. Like Korea was the single largest investing country. About 131 Korean companies alone were there in Sri Lanka at that time. Even yesterday when I met the Korean ambassador, I mentioned special emphasis how large the Korean presence in Sri Lanka were at that time. So we had to revisit these connections of ours. We had the Japanese strengths, yes.
Sorry. Does this mean we have to also come out of the Chinese influence in Sri Lanka, or manage it in such a way where we allow Korea to return and Japan and India's influence to be seen, more visible in the country?
If you look at China, how many Korean companies are there in China itself? China has become a manufacturing destination to the whole world. It's an industrial base. Not only the Korean, the Japanese, the Americans, the Indians all have stepped into Chinese manufacturing base. And that's why China has grown so fast and so strong. And there's no resistance merely because China has stepped into Sri Lanka, that the other countries can't come and equally have their presence in our country.
What is this concern about China, the debt diplomacy, that Sri Lanka has given way too much into Chinese influence, especially when we talk about the current economic concerns and IMF management? India, the United States have also requested that China be dealt as any other creditor in Sri Lanka. So there's a lot of concern among India and the United States as well.
What is the amount of debt China has given us? I mean the credit. How many? 5, 8 billion out of our 31 billion state debt. Our private sector also has borrowed. That's how our debt is about 58 billion US dollars. So what is the percentage of this? It is not, giving was not the wrong thing. But our local policy makers, the successive governments did not manage what they borrowed properly. How did they, having put up the highways, huge amounts of money have been invested on our infrastructure. But that is all still less than 1,000 kilometers we have built all across Sri Lanka. I don't think even qualifies to 500 to 600 kilometers of expressways. But how many industrial parks have we created alongside these expressways? When Busan, Seoul expressway was created by, at that time, General Kim, who was president of Korea. That was their starting point. 220 kilometers of that expressway, I've been on that. Alongside all the giant industrial parks got created. Here how many parks have got created alongside our expressways? Traditionally, Katnayaka was there since President J.R. Jawaharlal's time with minus expressway. There was the Katnayaka free trade zone, a sizable one. About 100, close about 90,000 employees were there during my time as chairman of the BOI. Having said that, up to Hambantota, we have the expressway, about 200 kilometers. How many parks are there alongside? How many investors have moved into these locations? Simultaneously, we should have built our industrial base. In Kapalthore, planning was on since the time I myself was chairman BOI, then subsequently as Minister for Investment Promotion in 2006 government. And when I went to Trincomalee as governor of the Eastern Province, still the Kapalthore, no industry is taken place for 25 long years. Why? Now people encroach onto the land. It's alongside the China Bay and also the Trincomalee Harbour, one of the largest natural harbours in the world. But where is the industrial base getting up? So that is why we need mega investors to come in to this country. And for that purpose, we need the Japanese, we need the Chinese, we need the Koreans, we need the Thai investors, we need the Indians, we need the Middle Eastern investors, we need the European and the United States. And how many mega industrialists are going into in the IT sector to Telangana state, that is the one that is separated from Andhra earlier, one state, now two states, Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, so that one of the largest industrial bases getting created in one state. It's a model for the whole world. Why? Simplicity of work and the procedures being deregulated and investment being encouraged. In fact, the Apple CEO currently made a fantastic speech there. He's Mr. Cook. And what did he say? He said most of the most convenient locations. They'll shift more bases out of US in order to India and to places like Andhra, Telangana, to generate the campuses that can feed the IT base in this country, in their country. So similarly, why can't we get that? I think we have got the correct leadership today in order to bring the investments to the country in President Ranil Wickremesinghe. And we have the port city to be completed now. I'm happy to know that there's the new chairman been put in there, Mr. Dinesh Virakudi, who has a lot of experience. To handle the port city is the best, because that's a destination by itself. We can create what it was meant to get created in terms of a destination like that of Dubai, with the type of new banking apparatus, the type of policies that will go into encourage the leisure sector, the service sector, the finance sector, and we need it badly. And catering within our segment of South Asia alone, India has 5 major states bordering Sri Lanka virtually. That is, you have the Tamil Nadu, then you have Andhra and Telangana, then on the other side you have Kerala, and you have Karnataka, where Infosys and all that is Karnataka states as Bangalore. So with all the 5, the population there is about 400 million alone in that segment, and that alone is enough to cater to a good presence in terms of tourism, in terms of good transfers, in terms of money has been spent across the shores of India. So we have to be part of a segment and cater to that, and then only we can rise and we can overcome our challenges currently we are facing.
Are these expectations and our targets realistic? Of course, it seems difficult in the current circumstances, but the President's statement and where we need to be, we've wanted to be South Asia's Singapore, but is this realistic going forward?
That is why the President has said, start with unity, start without discrimination, bring about a cohesive approach to the governing style, be transparent, be honest, free of corruption, and then cater to the aspirations of the people, long-term basis, not to find a Singapore tomorrow in Sri Lanka. You lay the foundation, right foundation. Now, how many times did President Wickremesinghe lose out at elections? But he had a plan to execute. If people only understood the seriousness of that plan, even at that time, when we were coming out with the free economic plans as a government, then of course the popular sentiment was not in support of long-term planning. So that was a clash. That is why a cohesive approach is needed. That is, I think, the vital need for a unity government to get created in the start off with this period in hand. So that will bring the constitutional reforms, stability, legal reforms, law and order, and then your question whether these are realistic. Realization can come with these fundamentals being in place.
Thank you very much for your time and for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you.
We had with us a former Foreign Minister of Sri Lanka, a former Minister of Industries as well as Advanced Technology, Enterprise Development and Investment Promotion, and an attorney himself, Mr. Rohitha Bogollagama, joining us at Hyde Park on Ada Derana 24. We'll see you again next week with yet another episode of the program.